I'm a 34-year-old woman, and I've been married to my husband Eric for 10 years. Eric is 37, and like most couples, we've had our share of ups and downs. But lately, things have been different, way worse, to be honest. It all started changing after our daughter Mia was born 3 years ago. Mia means the world to me, and I've always been her primary caregiver. Eric and I used to share the responsibilities, but since Mia came into our lives, something shifted between us, and not for the better. When Mia was born, I thought we'd be closer as a family. And for a while, that seemed true. We were figuring out how to be parents together, doing those sleepless nights, diaper changes, and trying to keep our marriage intact. But as Mia got older, Eric started acting differently. He became more controlling, especially when it came to decisions about Mia. It was always, I think she should go to this daycare, or we need to start her on this routine, and he never asked me what I thought. It was like he decided I wasn't capable of making decisions anymore. I suggested couples therapy when things got bad. He went 3 times, then suddenly announced he was done, said it was a waste of time and money. But I kept going. I needed someone to talk to, someone who could help me make sense of how our lives had gotten so tangled up. I hoped Eric would see the progress I was making and come back to therapy, but he never did. Then 6 months ago, Eric got a new job. It paid better, but it came with a lot of travel. At first, I thought it might be good for us, maybe some space would help cool things down, but the opposite happened. Every time he came back, he seemed more distant. He'd be on his phone all the time, leaving the room to take calls. He used to love spending time with Mia, reading her bedtime stories or taking her to the park, but now he'd just complain about being too tired. He stopped engaging with us altogether, like we were an afterthought. I tried to ask him about work, about how he was feeling, but he'd brush me off, say I was overthinking things. And then he started doing something I never expected. He began controlling when I could see Mia, like I needed his permission to spend time alone with my own daughter. He'd tell me I was too emotional around her, and that I might confuse her with mixed messages. It didn't make any sense. I've always been the one taking care of Mia's needs. But now, suddenly he acted like he knew what was best for her, better than I did. Last month, things reached a breaking point. Eric took Mia to his mother's house without telling me. I only found out because his sister posted a picture of Mia on social media. I called him, furious, asking why he didn't tell me where she was, but he just shrugged it off, said I was overreacting. We had a huge argument, and he accused me of being paranoid, like I was imagining problems where there were none, but it didn't feel like I was imagining things. It felt like he was trying to cut me out of Mia's life, one step at a time. That's when I started to really worry about what he was up to. I didn't tell him, but I consulted a lawyer just to understand my rights, just in case. The lawyer told me that if things got worse, I might need to take action. But I was scared to file any paperwork. I thought it would make everything explode. I wasn't ready for a full-on legal battle, not yet. But Eric didn't stop. He tightened his grip on our finances too. He took over managing the joint account, and suddenly I had to ask him before spending money, even for things like groceries or daycare. He said he was just being practical, managing our savings better, but I had this feeling he was trying to back me into a corner. It was like he wanted me to be financially dependent on him, so I wouldn't have any options. My friends started noticing how stressed I was, how I always seemed on edge. They told me I should think about leaving him, that I needed to protect myself and Mia, but every time I thought about walking away, I got this sick feeling in my stomach. What if he tried to keep Mia from me? I couldn't bear the thought of not seeing her every day. I was stuck, caught between wanting to get away from Eric and not knowing if I'd lose my daughter if I did. I did something I never thought I'd do. I went on Reddit and made a post. I asked if anyone else had been through something like this, if it was worth it to keep trying, or if I should just walk away. People's responses flooded in, and most of them said to be careful. That controlling behavior like this doesn't just stop. It felt validating, like maybe I wasn't just overreacting, but it also made everything feel more real. I was really facing the possibility that my marriage was over, and I needed to prepare for whatever came next. Now I'm documenting everything, just like the lawyer suggested. Every time Eric makes a comment about me being too emotional or tries to control how I spend time with Mia, I write it down. I keep thinking about that photo on social media, the way I found out about my own daughter's whereabouts from Eric's sister's post. It still stings. It feels like there's this storm brewing, and I can't tell which way it's going to go. I just know that I have to be ready, for myself and for Mia. Eric doesn't seem like he's going to back down, and I can't afford to, either. Update 1. Delia. I woke up one morning, expecting to hear Mia's usual chatter echoing through the house, but the silence was unsettling. I called out for her, checked her room, the living room. Nothing. That's when I saw it, a note on the kitchen counter in Eric's handwriting. It was short and cold, took Mia to my parents. Back in a few days. My heart dropped. No explanation, no heads up. I called him immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. I texted, asking him to call me back, to let me know Mia was okay, but he just ignored me. I kept calling, watching my phone like it held some lifeline, but nothing came through. The hours dragged on, and all I could think about was Mia being away from home, wondering why I wasn't there. By the afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore and called Eric's mother. She picked up, and I asked if Mia was there, if I could talk to her. She confirmed Mia was fine, but said that Eric didn't want me talking to her right now. It's Eric's decision, she told me, like it made any sense at all. My stomach churned, but I couldn't push too hard. I thanked her and hung up, feeling helpless. The next 3 days felt like an eternity. I barely slept, just kept staring at my phone, willing it to ring. Eric was still ignoring me, and I couldn't get any updates on Mia except from what his mother told me, that she was doing well. It was a small relief, but not nearly enough. I even thought about driving over to his parents' place, but my lawyer had advised against doing anything that might escalate the situation. So I stayed home, stuck in this awful limbo. When Eric finally came back, it was like he'd flipped a switch. He walked through the door with Mia, acting as if he hadn't just disappeared for days. He barely looked at me, just took Mia upstairs to her room. When he came back down, I tried to ask him what he thought he was doing, taking her without telling me. But he cut me off before I could finish, accusing me of being overbearing and saying that I needed to step back for Mia's sake. His tone was colder than I'd ever heard before. Then he dropped the bombshell. He said if I didn't stop insisting on spending time alone with Mia, he would file for full custody. He said I was unfit and too emotional to make decisions for her. It felt like a punch to the gut, hearing those words from the person I'd been married to for a decade. But the threat was real, and it hung in the air between us like a loaded weapon. I went back to my lawyer the next day, explained everything that had happened. She told me it was time to start documenting every little thing, every argument, every time he kept Mia from me. She mentioned that if things got worse, we might need to consider a temporary restraining order. It was a lot to take in, but I knew she was right. I couldn't afford to keep hoping that this would just blow over. I had a therapy session later that week, one of those solo ones that I'd been sticking with ever since Eric quit. For the first time, I admitted out loud that I was afraid of him, of what he might do next. I also worried about what all this back and forth was doing to Mia. She was too young to understand why her parents were at odds, but I could tell she sensed something was off. Meanwhile, Eric's behavior became even more erratic. He started taking Mia out of daycare without letting me know, showing up unannounced and insisting that he had a right to spend time with her whenever he wanted. The daycare workers seemed uneasy about it, but they couldn't do much without a formal custody agreement. He'd bring her back hours later, acting like it was no big deal, but it just made me feel more like a stranger in my own home. Then there was the money. I went to pay for groceries one day and realized our joint account was nearly empty. Eric had drained most of the funds, leaving me with just enough to cover some bills. I confronted him about it, but he just shrugged, said it was necessary to keep everything in order. I felt trapped, like he was closing every door behind me, one by one. A few days later, my best friend, who knew bits and pieces of what had been going on, offered me a place to stay. She told me that if I needed to get out with Mia, her door was always open. It was a lifeline, but I wasn't ready to take it. Not yet. I couldn't shake the feeling that leaving would somehow play right into Eric's hands, giving him more ammunition to use against me. One night, after another round of arguments, I managed to record a conversation with him. He didn't know it, but I caught him saying he'd make sure I never see Mia again, if I didn't back down. It was chilling to hear him say it out loud, but at least now I had something solid. I sent the recording to my lawyer the next morning. She told me it could be used in court if needed, but that it might provoke him if he found out I had it. A few days later, I noticed Eric acting even more secretive. He started locking away important documents in a small safe, things like Mia's birth certificate, papers I couldn't access anymore. It felt like he was getting ready for something, but I didn't know what. I just knew I had to stay a step ahead. Then out of nowhere, Eric's sister reached out to me. She said she was worried about Eric's behavior and that she'd noticed a change in him over the past few months. She even offered to testify on my behalf if things went to court. It was a small ray of hope, like maybe I wasn't fighting this battle completely alone. I posted another update on Reddit, explaining what had happened, including the recording. People flooded the comments, urging me to protect myself and Mia, telling me to move quickly before Eric made another move. It helped knowing I had that support, even from strangers, but the fear was still there, lurking in the background. I knew this was only the beginning, and I needed to brace myself for whatever came next. Update 2. Not long after Eric's ultimatum, his behavior got even more unpredictable. He started taking off for days at a time, always with Mia. He wouldn't give me any notice, just disappear, and I'd find myself staring at an empty driveway, wondering when they'd come back. He never bothered to answer my calls or texts while they were gone, and when they did return, he acted like he didn't owe me an explanation. One time, it was 4 days before I saw them again. When he walked through the door, I tried to ask where they had been, but he just dismissed me, saying it was none of my business. I had no way of knowing where my daughter was during those days, and it drove me to the edge. Then, one morning, I woke up to a long message from Eric's mother. It was pages of her blaming me for everything, saying that I was the reason our marriage was failing, that I was making Eric's life difficult. She even suggested that Mia might be better off with Eric since he's always been such a dedicated father. It stung, but it also felt like a glimpse into what Eric might be planning. I went straight to my lawyer. She told me it was time to file for temporary custody and a protective order, something that would give me more control while we sorted things out. I agreed, but the process wasn't as quick as I'd hoped. We filed the paperwork, but the lawyer warned me that it could take a while to get a court date and that Eric might find out before we had any legal backing. The whole time, I kept my phone close, worried about what his next move might be. A few days later, I noticed some of my important documents were missing. My passport, Mia's birth certificate, things I knew I'd kept in our home office. I searched everywhere, but they were gone. I was almost certain Eric had locked them away in the safe, the one he kept hidden in the closet, the one he no longer gave me the code to. When I confronted him about it, he didn't deny it outright. Instead, he smirked and told me I was losing my mind. It was infuriating, but there was nothing I could do without proof. That's when I started making an emergency plan. I packed a bag with essentials, clothes for me and Mia, some cash, a few of Mia's favorite toys, and stashed it in the trunk of my car. It wasn't much, but I needed to know that if things got worse, I could grab her and go without having to think twice. Then Eric's behavior shifted again, like a pendulum swinging to the other extreme. One night, he came home with takeout from my favorite restaurant, saying he thought it would be nice to have dinner together as a family. He started doing small, considerate things like picking up groceries and cooking dinner. He even talked about starting fresh, about working things out for Mia's sake. It might have sounded hopeful, but it just felt wrong. Even during these moments of kindness, he kept limiting my time with Mia. He insisted on being there for every bedtime story, every mealtime, every moment we spent together. If I asked for time alone with her, he'd find a reason to say no, making it sound like he was doing what was best for her. The whole thing felt like a game I couldn't win, and it was wearing me down. One afternoon, Eric's sister showed up unannounced. She offered to take Mia for a few days, saying it might help ease the tension between Eric and me. I hesitated. Everything in me screamed that this was a bad idea, but she kept pressing, and eventually I gave in. I watched as Mia left with her aunt, trying to convince myself that it might help, but I couldn't shake the unease that settled in my chest. My lawyer suggested a new strategy, requesting a wellness check from Child Protective Services to ensure that Mia was safe when she was with Eric. I wasn't sure if it was the right move. What if it made things worse? But the thought of it gave me some small sense of control, something I desperately needed. A few days later, I managed to meet with Eric's sister privately. She pulled me aside, glancing over her shoulder like she was afraid of being overheard. She hinted that Eric had been planning to seek full custody for months, even before things between us got really bad. She urged me to think about leaving for my own safety. It was a relief to hear that someone in his family was on my side, but it only confirmed my worst fears. I started recording all of my interactions with Eric whenever I could. I'd leave my phone running during conversations, hoping that if things escalated, I'd have something to back me up in court. Then one evening, Eric took off with Mia again without a word. This time it was different. He didn't respond to my calls or texts for 2 whole days. I felt like I was losing my grip on everything. I couldn't focus on anything else, just kept staring at the front door, willing it to open. When he finally came back, he acted like I was the one overreacting, as if I hadn't spent the last 48 hours imagining the worst. That night, I broke down. Everything hit me at once, the fear, the uncertainty, the feeling that I was losing Mia piece by piece. I posted another update on Reddit, pouring out everything that had happened. People responded in droves, offering advice and urging me to take action, to fight back before things spiraled even further. They linked resources for legal aid and shared stories of their own struggles, telling me not to give up. It helped, knowing I wasn't completely alone in this, but the fear lingered. With the court date looming and Eric becoming more unpredictable by the day, I knew that the next few weeks could change everything. I just hoped that I was ready for whatever came next. Update 3. When Eric finally came back with Mia after 48 hours, he walked in as if he'd just gone out for groceries. I demanded to know where they'd been, but he barely looked at me and dropped the news like a bomb. He'd filed for full custody. He claimed I was mentally unstable and that he was doing what was best for Mia. He didn't bother to wait for my reaction, just turned and walked away, leaving me in the hallway reeling. The court documents arrived a few days later, delivered right to my door. Inside, Eric's accusations were laid out in black and white. He claimed I was too emotional, that I was mentally unfit to care for Mia, and that I had been trying to alienate her from him. Reading through the papers, I felt like I was seeing a stranger's version of myself, one I didn't recognize. It was clear that he had been planning this for a long time, using every interaction and disagreement as ammunition. I met with my lawyer again, and she wasn't surprised by the move. She said it was a classic strategy in custody battles, especially when one parent wanted to paint the other as unstable. But she also told me to fight back, to gather every bit of evidence I could to counter Eric's claims. I started pulling together everything I had, the recordings of our arguments, the text messages where he dismissed my concerns, the photos showing that I was the one always with Mia, taking her to daycare, reading to her at night. In the days that followed, I noticed Mia acting differently. She seemed quieter, hesitant to talk to me like she used to. She'd ask questions like, "Is Daddy mad at you? Or do you and Daddy fight because of me?" It tore me apart. I tried to keep things normal for her, doing the activities she loved, but I couldn't ignore how she seemed caught in the middle of something she didn't understand. It made me wonder what Eric might be saying to her when I wasn't around. Soon, the date for the temporary custody hearing arrived. Eric showed up with a high-profile attorney, a polished man in a sharp suit, clearly used to cases like this. The tension in the courtroom was thick, and I could feel Eric's eyes on me the whole time. When it was his lawyer's turn, he played a video clip that caught me off guard. It was a recording of me during one of our arguments, but it was edited, cut to make me look unhinged, shouting out of context. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, but my lawyer managed to cast doubt on its authenticity, pointing out how the clip seemed spliced together. The real turning point came when Eric's sister took the stand. She looked nervous but determined, and when she started talking, she didn't hold back. She described how Eric had been planning to isolate me from Mia for months, how he'd become more controlling over time. She even mentioned the times he'd taken Mia away without telling me, how it seemed like he was trying to manipulate the situation to make me look bad. It was a relief to hear someone else acknowledge what I'd been going through, and I could see the judge taking note. After a tense deliberation, the judge granted me temporary custody of Mia, but he allowed Eric visitation rights. It wasn't the end of the fight, but it was a small victory. As we left the courtroom, Eric's expression was unreadable. He cornered me in the parking lot, his face twisted with anger, whispering that I wouldn't win in the end. I kept my phone recording the entire time, just in case. I could tell he was trying to rattle me, but I held my ground and walked away. Bringing Mia back home felt like a win, but things were far from normal. She kept asking when she would see her dad again, looking up at me with those big, confused eyes. I did my best to reassure her without saying anything negative about Eric. My therapist reminded me to focus on creating a stable environment for her, to show her that things were going to be okay, even if it didn't always feel that way. During his court-ordered visitations, Eric continued his manipulation. One day, Mia came back and told me, "Daddy says you want to take me away from him." I had to bite back my frustration and calmly explain that I would never do that. I told her that both Mommy and Daddy loved her very much, and that none of this was her fault. but inside, I knew that Eric was trying to turn her against me, planting seeds of doubt in her mind. My lawyer advised me to voluntarily undergo a psychological evaluation to counter Eric's claims of instability. It wasn't something I wanted to do, but I knew it could make a difference in court. It would show that I had nothing to hide, that I was willing to prove my stability for Mia's sake. Meanwhile, Eric made things harder financially. He stopped paying for Mia's daycare and refused to cover any of our shared expenses, like her medical bills and groceries. I had to stretch every dollar to make ends meet, but I refused to give in. I started looking for work from home jobs, anything that could help me stay afloat while I focused on the custody battle. I posted another update on Reddit, sharing what had happened in court, the edited video, the struggle with Mia's changing behavior. The support flooded in again, people offering advice, links to legal resources, stories of their own struggles. It gave me the strength to keep going, to believe that I could make it through this, even if every day felt like a new challenge. The final custody hearing was still ahead, and I knew it wouldn't be easy. But with each piece of evidence I gathered, each step I took to protect Mia, I felt like I was getting closer to the light at the end of a very long tunnel. I just had to hold on until then. Update 4. After the temporary custody ruling, Eric's behavior took another turn. He started sending me long, rambling texts, sometimes pleading with me to drop the case, saying that we could work things out for Mia's sake. But then, just as quickly, he'd flip, sending messages full of threats, saying he'd ruin my life if I didn't back down. I kept every single message, forwarding them to my lawyer, who assured me that they could be useful in court. A few weeks later, I got the results of my psychological evaluation. The report was positive, showing no signs of instability or issues that Eric claimed I had. My lawyer planned to use it as evidence to counter Eric's accusations. It was a relief to have something solid to fight back with, especially since the next court hearing was looming. Then, during one of Eric's visitations with Mia, he didn't bring her back on time. The hours ticked by, and I tried calling him, but he ignored my calls. When he finally picked up, he said Mia was having too much fun to leave, and that he'd bring her back when he was ready. I thought about calling the police, but I hesitated, worried about how it might affect Mia, how it might frighten her. Eventually, he showed up hours late, acting like he had done nothing wrong. I brought this up with my lawyer, and she advised me to file a formal complaint about his behavior during the visitation. She said it could be useful if we needed to modify the visitation agreement in the future. It felt like another step in this long, exhausting process, but I knew it was necessary. A few days later, my lawyer reached out with new evidence. She'd managed to get surveillance footage from a local restaurant, showing Eric during one of his visits with Mia. In the video, he's caught yelling at her, looking angry and impatient, as she sat quietly, tears in her eyes. Seeing that footage was like a punch to the gut, but I knew it could be crucial in proving that he wasn't the stable, caring parent he was trying to present in court. One evening, Mia opened up to me in a way she hadn't before. She was upset and told me through tears that her dad had said, "Mommy is trying to take me away forever." I hugged her tight, promising her that she would always have me, that I would never let anything like that happen. I recorded our conversation on my phone, knowing it could be important later. Soon after, the court ordered mediation, hoping that Eric and I might be able to reach some common ground before things escalated further. But the session was a disaster. Eric lost his temper halfway through, accusing me of brainwashing Mia, of turning her against him. He pounded his fist on the table, his voice rising, while the mediator took notes. The session ended with the mediator advising the judge to reconsider the visitation schedule due to Eric's aggressive behavior. Not long after, Eric filed an emergency motion for full custody again. He claimed that I was poisoning Mia's mind, that I was trying to turn her against him. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The accusations seemed endless, and each one stung more than the last. But this time, I was prepared. At the next hearing, I presented the new surveillance footage, the text messages, and audio recordings of Eric's outbursts. The judge took his time reviewing everything. When he watched the restaurant footage, I saw his expression change. He looked concerned, almost uncomfortable. It was clear that Eric's version of events wasn't matching up with the evidence. My lawyer pointed out the inconsistencies, and I could see Eric growing angrier with each passing minute. In the end, the judge decided to impose stricter conditions on Eric's visitation rights. He ordered that all visits would now have to be supervised at a neutral location. It wasn't a total win, but it was a huge step forward. Mia would be safer, and Eric wouldn't have the chance to keep her from me for hours without warning. After the hearing, Eric sent me an angry email, full of blame. He accused me of turning everyone against him, of making him out to be the bad guy. He vowed that I would regret this, but he wouldn't let it go. I forwarded the email straight to my lawyer, adding it to the growing pile of evidence. It was hard not to feel the weight of his threats, but I reminded myself that I was doing this for Mia, to protect her. With the supervised visits in place, I noticed a change in Mia. She seemed more relaxed, more like the little girl she used to be. We started doing some of the things we used to enjoy, painting, reading her favorite books, playing with her stuffed animals. It was a small piece of normalcy in the middle of all this chaos, and I clung to it. My family and friends stepped up, helping out with childcare whenever I needed to meet with my lawyer or go to court. Their support made such a difference, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this fight. They rallied around me, offering encouragement and a shoulder to lean on when the days got hard. I updated Reddit again, sharing everything that had happened, the surveillance footage, the mediation session, Eric's email threats. The comments poured in, with people offering advice on how to prepare for the next court date. They urged me to stay strong, to keep fighting, and to focus on what was best for Mia. It was like having a community of strangers who understood the struggle, and their words helped me find the strength to keep going. The final custody hearing was coming up, and I knew it would be the toughest part yet. But I had to believe that all the evidence I'd gathered, all the steps I'd taken to protect Mia, would make a difference. For the first time in months, I felt like there was a chance we might actually come out on the other side of this. All I could do was hope that the truth would finally come to light. Update 5. The date for the final custody hearing came faster than I expected. It felt like everything had been building to this moment. My lawyer and I spent days preparing, going over all the evidence, the surveillance footage, the text messages, the recordings. I knew this decision could change everything, and I held on to that hope, even though the nerves never really left. A week before the hearing, Eric tried to reach out directly. He called, then left a long voicemail, offering a so-called settlement. He said he'd be willing to share custody if I dropped the supervised visits. He tried to make it sound like he was being generous, like he was doing it for Mia's sake, but I could hear the desperation in his voice. I refused. I couldn't take the chance of putting Mia back into a situation where I had no control over her safety. I forwarded the voicemail to my lawyer, just to keep everything on record. A few days later, during my final therapy session before court, I had a realization. No matter how things turned out, I knew I had done everything I could to protect Mia. I couldn't control what the judge would decide, but I could stand in that courtroom, knowing I'd fought for my daughter. 2 nights before the hearing, Eric showed up unannounced at my house. It was already dark, and he was banging on the door, demanding to see Mia. He kept shouting that he had a right to see her, but the visitation rules were clear. He couldn't just show up like this. I called the police, and they arrived quickly. They escorted him off the property, telling him that he needed to respect the court order. He left, fuming, and I watched from the window, holding Mia close. My lawyer moved fast after that. She filed for an emergency restraining order, citing Eric's aggressive behavior. The judge granted it, at least until the final custody decision was made. It felt like a small victory, but I knew the real challenge was still ahead. On the day of the hearing, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Eric and his lawyer sat across from us, looking smug. But I had my lawyer, my documentation, and even Eric's sister ready to testify again. The judge listened carefully as both sides presented their evidence. Eric's lawyer tried to paint me as unstable, but my evaluation report and the evidence of Eric's erratic behavior countered every claim. My lawyer laid out the recordings, the footage of Eric yelling at Mia, the threatening emails and messages. When it was Eric's turn to take the stand, things took a turn. During the cross-examination, he lost his cool. He started ranting about how I'd ruined his life, his voice echoing in the courtroom. He kept throwing accusations, his face red with anger. The judge watched it all unfold, his expression growing more serious. It was like he was seeing the real Eric, the side of him that I'd been dealing with for months. When it was my turn to speak, I kept my focus on Mia. I talked about wanting a stable, loving environment for her, a place where she could grow up without fear or confusion. I shared how much I wanted her to have a relationship with both of us, but that it needed to be safe and healthy for her. I tried to keep it simple, speaking from the heart, hoping that the judge would understand. After what felt like an eternity, the judge finally gave his decision. He ruled in my favor, granting me primary custody of Mia. Eric's unsupervised access was severely restricted, with any future visits requiring supervision at a neutral location. The relief hit me like a wave. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. Eric didn't take it well. As soon as the judge finished speaking, he stormed out of the courtroom, not even glancing my way or acknowledging Mia. I knew this wouldn't be the end, that he might try to fight back. But it was a start. At least for now, Mia and I had a chance to rebuild our lives. When we got home, I focused on helping Mia adjust. I brought back some of our old routines, our nightly story time, baking cookies on the weekends, walks to the park. Slowly, I could see her starting to relax, starting to feel more at ease. She even smiled more, the way she used to. About a month later, Eric tried to appeal the custody decision. He filed more paperwork, but the court denied it. The judge upheld the original ruling, citing the evidence we had presented. It was another weight lifted, and I could feel the tension easing, even if just a little. Mia began opening up to me more during our time together. One afternoon, while we were coloring, she told me that she used to be scared when her dad got angry. She said he would shout a lot when things didn't go his way. It broke my heart to hear her say those things, but I promised her that she was safe now, that she didn't have to worry anymore. I made sure she knew that no matter what happened, I'd always be there for her. I posted my final update on Reddit, sharing everything that had happened, the court ruling, Eric's outburst, and the slow progress Mia and I were making. I thanked everyone who had supported me through those dark months, all the advice and encouragement that kept me going. It felt strange, like closing a chapter of a very painful story, but it also felt like the beginning of something better. I asked the community for advice on how to help Mia heal from everything she'd been through. The responses flooded in, people sharing their own stories of recovery, suggesting ways to make her feel secure and loved. It felt like a new beginning for both of us, and I was finally hopeful that we could find some peace. There's still a long road ahead, but I'm ready to face it. I know there will be more challenges, more hurdles to overcome, but I'm not as afraid anymore. I've learned how to stand up for myself and for Mia, and I'm not going to let anything take that away. For now, we're taking it one day at a time, hoping that each step forward brings us a little closer to a brighter future.